The honourable member from Calgary Nose Hill.
Today, Cree lawyer Leah Ballantyne, who is a survivor of the 60 scoop, was quoted as saying, "Identity fraud is fraud. I think someone who has taken an oath of office to represent people in a level of government has an ethical duty to be honest with all constituents and all people in Canada, in which case the Minister of Employment has not done." She's right. That Liberal minister falsely claimed Indigenous identity. His company received government contracts using that stolen identity, apparently while consorting with cocaine dealers, and all while he was a sitting Minister of the Crown. What kind of a message is the government sending by allowing him to sit in cabinet? As Jody Wilson-Raybould said today, the Prime Minister is making a mockery of reconciliation and is enabling, quote, white people playing ancestry wheel of fortune. That fraudulent minister must resign, or the Prime Minister must fire him.
I was listening very carefully to the honourable. Listening very carefully to the honourable member, and it is order, please. I was listening very attentively to the honourable member's statement, and for most of the statement, it was within the bounds. The last sentence, by impugning a member directly, is not permitted in this place. I'm going to ask the honourable member just to withdraw that word so that we can move on.
Mr. Speaker, I was quoting a Cree lawyer who called the minister a fraud. He is a fraud, and I don't withdraw.
I'm going to invite the honourable member.
NDP Liberal government has made Canadians unsafe. Their catch and release policies have caused violent crime to increase by 50%. Legislation like Bill C-83 makes life even easier for violent offenders in prison, where they must now be incarcerated in the least restrictive environment. What that means is that an individual who abducted and then assisted her boyfriend in the sexually motivated killing of an 8-year-old girl, in 2009, is now allowed to be in the presence of children through a mother-child program in a federal prison. The Liberals have broken our justice system so thoroughly that sex offenders and killers, including those who are serving sentences for killing children, now have access to children in prison. Think about that. This government must be held accountable for their egregious failures, Mr. Speaker. A common-sense Conservative government will prioritise the rights of victims and the safety of Canadians for all Canadians.
The honourable member from Oxford.
After 9 years of this Liberal NDP government, they have broken.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Day after day brings new sordid details about the employment minister's scandal. And yesterday we learned that his company shares a mailing address with an international drug trafficker who's been busted for cocaine not once, but twice. He's been caught out in falsehoods, caught faking Indigenous identity to try to secure government contracts meant for real Indigenous people, and his company is under investigation for 9 fraud-related counts. Why on earth has the Prime Minister not fired this man?
Right.
The honourable Minister for Employment and Workforce Development.
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday, I don't know the person referred to in that article. I've never met that person. It's stated in the article, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
Let's recap the scandal so far. He said he was Indigenous, even though he wasn't. He said his great-grandmother was Cree, even though she wasn't. He said there was another Randy working at the company, even though there wasn't, that he had nothing to do with the company while he was in cabinet, even though he was, and his company got a contract while he was sitting around the cabinet table. In a normal government, any one of those scandals would be cause for dismissal.
Yeah, that's right.
So why in this wacko Liberal government does this man still sit in cabinet?
I ask members to be very judicious in their use of words.
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has already answered this question many times. The question that we still haven't had an answer for is why the Conservative leader's scandal, who refuses to seek his security clearance and protect himself and his future members during the next election, what is he hiding? When he refuses to get information about the risks of foreign interference for the upcoming elections. Thank you. I would ask the honourable member to not speak until the chair recognizes him.
Regina Capel.
Well, we don't know what it'll take for this guy to get fired from this Prime Minister. We do know what will get you fired. Remember Jody Wilson-Raybould? Oh, yeah. She was fired for telling the truth about the Prime Minister's attempts to interfere in a criminal case. Here's what she had to say. A Prime Minister committed to true reconciliation would have removed this minister and the other Randy from cabinet long ago. Instead, we get to watch white people play Ancestry Wheel of Fortune. Ouch. How come under this Prime Minister, a strong Indigenous woman gets fired for telling the truth when a weak, fake Indigenous man gets to keep his job after lying?
Again, I'm going to ask the honourable member from Regina Capel, who once sat in this chair, to withdraw that one word which was directly used to another member, which would not be considered parliamentary. And I ask the honourable member to do so.
I'll withdraw the word lying and replace it with telling falsehoods.
The actual word. The word which was being used. I'm going to ask the honourable member to withdraw the word fake, please.
Sorry, just for the Speaker to clarify, the word fake, but the Minister did...
He faked all those things.
The Minister is now admitting that he's not Indigenous, so he pretended to be something that he wasn't.
Colleagues, yesterday there were members who were asked to withdraw that very same word, and the member did. And so I'm going to ask the honourable member if he could please do so.
I will withdraw the word fake and replace it with either sham, imitation, counterfeit.
The honourable member. Colleagues, I've always insisted, I'm going to ask all members please not to take the floor while the Speaker is addressing Parliament. When it has been the tradition of this place to ask very tough questions, to keep government accountable. It's important for government, of course, to provide very clear answers. But we try to do this in a way that allows people to treat each other with decorum and respect. And so the honourable member has sat in this chair in this position once before. Yesterday we asked a number of members to, when it was referring to a particular member, to withdraw that same word that I'm just asking for today. I just asked the honourable member just to withdraw that word so we could just move on.
Mr. Speaker, when I sat in that chair, I heard the word fake being used many, many times.
I will come back to this issue later on. I will come back to this issue near the end of question period. Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Vita Lakes.
To get government contracts, the Liberal minister from Edmonton said that he was Indigenous, but he's not. He said that he wasn't the Randy who was involved in the ongoing operations of the company that was applying for government contracts, but text messages show that he was. Now, he also said he wasn't directing his company from the cabinet table, but we know that that's also not true. Not true, not true, and not true. So we don't know which minister they're going to stand up, but what we want to know from that minister is, do they think that that behavior is appropriate, and do they think that he should remain in cabinet?
The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the minister has already responded to those questions. But what I find really interesting is that today marks 1,000 days since Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, and we have not heard a single question about this from the Conservative members of Parliament. This is unsurprising for them, given the fact that when it comes to their support for Ukraine, it has been wavering over the past year. On this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, we stand for Ukraine. Do the Conservative members of Parliament?
Exactly. Question.
The Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Vita Lakes.
Well, I'm glad that the minister showed up for work, but she must have been late enough to not hear our statement where we expressed, of course, our support for Ukraine. But let's focus on the facts. The facts are that their cabinet colleague is involved with cocaine traffickers. Their cabinet colleague is pretending to be Indigenous in order to disenfranchise Indigenous-owned companies and Indigenous people. That's who they're in league with. That minister can't seem to tell the truth to save his own life. So Randy or other Randy or pretend Indigenous Randy, none of them should be in cabinet. Why won't they fire this fraudster?
Again, for the second day in a row, I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Leeds Grenville to, the very last part of this question, using language which just can't pass in this place. The Honourable Member, will he just simply withdraw that question, and then we can move on? Withdraw that word, and then we could just simply move on.
The word fraudster is withdrawn.
I thank the Honourable Member. The Honourable Leader of the Government of the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess the member opposite wasn't paying attention to my answer because I said we were halfway through question period and I had yet to hear a question from the members opposite about the war of aggression by Russia on Ukraine. And Mr. Speaker, let's look at the facts. This time last year, they were holding up and voting against the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement, an agreement that Ukraine had asked us for as an ally. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to meaningful action, they do everything they can to hold back support from Ukraine, and we're seeing that today too. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to ask the Honourable Member from Battle River Crowfoot, please, to not take the floor when not recognised by the Chair. The Honourable Member from Halliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Peterborough. Brock.
Speaker, reports continue to reveal one false statement after another about the employment minister's claim of Indigenous heritage. The fact he is still in cabinet has laid bare the reality that truth and reconciliation mean nothing to Liberals. We found out today the company co-owned by the minister, GHI, is in fact green-lit to bid on government contracts. This is the same company that falsely claimed to be wholly Indigenous owned while inventing this fictional other Randy and sharing a mailbox with an alleged cocaine smuggler. Will the Prime Minister just end the charade and fire the minister?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It only seems apparent that the Conservatives want to talk about reconciliation when it's allegation, but rather they don't want to talk about reconciliation when we're talking about investing in First Nations housing or helping Indigenous people ensure their opportunities to have economic success or procure from the government of Canada. They don't want to talk about that, Mr. Speaker, because you know why? Their record is shameful, Mr. Speaker. In fact, they have continually cut services for Indigenous people. When they were in power, we will do the opposite.
The Honourable Member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, during committee and just now, the Minister of Indigenous Services refused to defend her colleague, the pretend Indigenous Minister of Employment. The Minister of Employment pretended to be Indigenous so that his company could steal contracts from Indigenous communities and businesses. While the Prime Minister continues to be the defender of the pretender, even his cabinet colleagues are losing faith. Now, this question is for the Minister of Indigenous Services. Will she stand up and defend her cabinet colleague, or should he be fired?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
You know, Mr. Speaker, just moments ago I was speaking with the National Chief about the shenanigans that are happening at Nylon Committee as the Conservatives attempt to undermine the study of the water legislation that so many First Nations have poured their heart and soul into, Mr. Speaker, preventing it from actually getting to this place and hopefully eventually to Senate. They talk about standing up for First Nations people, but when they have the chance to be allies, they completely drop the ball.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that either the employment minister or the other Randy actually might also be moonlighting as a magician. We know he says he's Indigenous, even though he's not. We know he stole from Indigenous Canadians. We know he said he wasn't involved in the company when he was in cabinet, but he was. But today, perhaps as a magician, he has made his business partners disappear. Shauna Parker and Felix Papineau have disconnected their phone numbers, they deactivated their emails, and they are nowhere to be found to avoid the scrutiny of this Parliament. So will the minister stand up, wave his magic wand, and tell his business partners to show up here?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. It's really unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, to hear so many falsehoods and so little time in this House. It's really unfortunate that the Conservatives are investing all of their energy in falsehoods that are derailing the House and detract from the work of the House, from what's important, and that is working for Quebecers and Canadians. But one thing that we still don't know the answer to is why the Conservative leader, who sits next to the member, has not sought his security clearance so they can protect all members during the next election.
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
If the minister doesn't know where to find these individuals, perhaps he can ask the other Randy, who's still very much in contact with those partners. But even the Liberals are taking note of this humiliating and fraudulent affair. Liberals like Jody Wilson-Raybould, who called it, quote, so shameful and extremely destructive. The Prime Minister fires the first Indigenous Attorney General, but keeps the first fake Indigenous Employment Minister. That's some version of reconciliation. When is the Prime Minister going to fire the Employment Minister and the other Randy?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the minister has addressed those issues. He has stated but Mr. Speaker, what we want to know is why is the Leader of the Opposition silencing his members of Parliament? Why won't he allow his members of Parliament to speak on behalf of their constituents and advocate for their communities? Mr. Speaker, all we hear from the Leader of the Opposition is silencing his own members of Parliament, Mr. Speaker. Why won't he just let them speak? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Employment is embroiled in allegations of fraud. He almost certainly violated the Conflict of Interest Act. He got caught pretending to be Indigenous in an effort to steal government contracts from legitimately owned Indigenous businesses. And we now learn that the minister has a business connection to a cocaine trafficker. In the face of all of that, why is he still in cabinet?
The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. The member has once again combined all sorts of falsehoods to make some sense of the story, but the minister has answered these questions on several opportunities. All of this is false, and we still don't know, however, how the member who asked the question will protect himself against foreign interference during the upcoming election if his Conservative leader refuses to seek his security clearance. How will he know if he's protected from foreign interference under the next election?
Member from St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, one must ask why the Prime Minister hasn't seen fit to fire this minister. Could it be that the Prime Minister violated the Conflict of Interest Act not once, but twice? Could it be that the Prime Minister is a cultural appropriator, having worn blackface more times than he can remember? Isn't it the case that if the Prime Minister were to fire the minister, he'd have to fire himself?
Yeah.
The Honourable Minister for Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, what Canadians are witnessing today is very disturbing, Mr. Speaker. On many occasions, you had questions that were asked and answers that was provided, Mr. Speaker. But the real issue that Canadians are asking at home is why the leader of the Conservative would not get the security clearance, would not get the briefing, and would not do his job, Mr. Speaker. That's what Canadians are concerned about. Get the clearance, get the briefing, and do your job, man.
I invite all members to ensure that they ask their questions to the Speaker. That they speak to the Speaker, whether or not they ask questions or give answers. The
Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. The Minister of Official Languages said he was an Indigenous so he can get money for Indigenous companies, even though he's not. Also, the famous Randy, he says isn't him, even though we know there's only one Randy there. He's an imposter and a charlatan. He's corrupt. On several occasions, I have asked all members to be very cautious in terms of the language that they are using. This time, the language that is being used directly impugns another member of this place, and I would ask the Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles to ask his question again and to retract his comments and to re-ask his question. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Official Languages has said he's Indigenous. I would ask you to remove your comments first, retract them, and then start your question again. The Honourable Member for Saint-Charles. I'd like to retract that he's a fraudster and corrupt, and I will say instead that he has committed fraud and corruption. Is that okay? No. That won't work. I would ask members to follow the members of other who asked the question yesterday, and their retraction was acceptable. So I'd ask the member once again, please, to retract his comments and then ask his question again. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. We can't say the minister is a fraudster and corrupt. Instead, there are allegations of fraud and corruption with respect to this minister, and I would ask the Prime Minister to remove him from Cabinet. The Honourable Minister of Public Services and Procurement. Our colleague from Charlevoix-Saint-Jean is obviously just having a hard time expressing himself today, but one thing we do agree on is that the whole story of his Conservative leader who saying that the agreement we have with the government of Quebec is to build 8,000 housing units, but he said there are none, but there are dozens in his own riding. So these units are being built. So when will he ask his Conservative leader to go himself and see that there are truly projects in?
The Radical Environment Minister continues to hold financial interest in Cycle Capital, which benefited the most from the billion-dollar Liberal Green Slush Fund. And today, once again, the Liberals are refusing to produce the uncensored documents for the House and the RCMP on the slush fund. The Liberal cover-up, the obstruction of justice, has been going on for 6 months. Wow. When will the Prime Minister come clean? Send the uncensored documents to the RCMP, and including everything that this corrupt Environment Minister is involved in. Yeah.
This is not going to be a surprise to members. I'm going to ask the honourable member from South St. Margaret's to remove that word, which he knows, into talking about the honourable minister. And I'm going to ask the honourable member to simply withdraw those words.
I'll withdraw those words that stuffed his pockets with.
I'm going to ask the honourable member just to simply withdraw the words, and we will move on.
He stuffed his pockets with the money. I'm sorry, he's not corrupt. He stuffed his pockets.
It's been delayed too long. The honourable the honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Mr. Speaker, the level of disrespect that Conservative members of Parliament are not just showing this place, but are also showing to you is completely unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, we, as of November 8th, have deposited nearly 29,000 pages of documents in regard to this matter. Mr. Speaker, it is only Conservative members of Parliament that are filibustering and obstructing this place. They are not standing on moral, they are not standing on principle, they are simply trying to hold back the good work that we need to do for Canadians. And Mr. Speaker, their disrespectful behaviour is just one more example of their inappropriate behaviour here in this place. Thank you.
The honourable member from Don Valley East.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week we found out the Conservative leader was
weekend it was reported that David Lavery from Perth, Ontario had been detained by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Mr. Lavery is the hero known as Canadian Dave, who rescued hundreds during the fall of Kabul. After all other Canadian officials had already been evacuated, Canadian Dave and his team stayed on in Kabul to ensure the safe passage of Canadians and others on the final flights out of the country. Now he is in Taliban custody, and we worry for his well-being. What steps is the government taking to bring Dave Lavery home?
The Honourable Minister for Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank my colleague for his very important question. Of course, we're very aware of his case, and I can't give more information due to confidential issues, but what I would like to suggest to him is to work with him to make sure that Mr. Lavery comes back home. We will take every single measures to bring him home. Thank you.
Tori Stafford was 8 years old when she was lured from school by a monster. Tori never made it home. She was beaten, tortured, sexually assaulted, and murdered by Terry Lynn McClintock and Michael Rafferty. Today, Terry Lynn McClintock lives in a cozy townhouse with free access to the mother-child program. Yes, you heard that correctly. A child killer has free access to children in prison. In what universe is this okay?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member knows that the facts that she just alleged are entirely fabricated. She says, Mr. Speaker, in what universe would that...
I'm going to invite the honourable minister to withdraw that comment because saying that someone has told a deliberate falsehood in this place is not considered parliamentary. So I'll ask the honourable member to order. I'll invite the honourable minister to withdraw those comments and to start from the top.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to withdraw those words. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for honourable members in this House that allege a series of circumstances to be sure that they're accurate. And when the honourable member says, in what scenario would that particular conduct that she alleges be appropriate, the answer, Mr. Speaker, is in no scenario in Canada. So she can wonder why she keeps talking about issues that she knows are entirely inaccurate, Mr. Speaker.
Paying his carbon tax is more important than buying groceries or paying rent. He obviously believes that feeding his obese bureaucracy is more important than Canadians feeding their family. Documents reveal just to administer the carbon tax will cost Canadians more than $800 million by 2030, an increase of 163%. This is at a time when more than 2 million Canadians were forced to a food bank in a single month. If the Prime Minister really believes that Canadians, it's more important to pay the carbon tax than feed their families, call a carbon tax now, and let's find out.
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, every time the Conservative Party of Canada talks about the issue of climate change, they never talk about how it's costing Canadians, just for the month of July and August of this year, $7 billion in climate damages, Mr. Speaker. A record, and the year is not yet over. They may have decided to let Canadians down and let the planet burn, but on this side of the House, we're here for Canadians, we're here to fight climate change, and we're here to build the economy of the 21st century.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
The documents reveal just as much pain that the carbon tax inflicts on Canadians. They will be paying more than $800 million just to administer the carbon tax. Not only have the costs skyrocketed, but the number of bureaucrats just to manage this scam has doubled. Let's put that in perspective. Farmers will pay $1 billion in carbon taxes by 2030. So the Prime Minister is putting the family farm at risk just to feed his bloated bureaucracy. If he really feels that Canadian families want to pay the carbon tax over feeding their own kids, call a carbon tax election and let's find out.